So lots of leaders and heads of state making their way to South Africa if they're not already here. We know, of course, that the Chinese President Xi Jinping, he arrived last night as well. There's still going to be many other dignitaries making their way down to the Sandton Convention Centre later this morning. It's a three-day summit set to conclude on Thursday. Also having arrived is Brazil's Lula da Silva, that was yesterday, and late last night, China's Xi Jinping. Now, delegations from both Russia and India are expected to arrive later this morning. That will complete, of course, the group's representation at the summit. And things could look very different, Rofhiwa Madzena, as we come to you in Sandton. Things could look very different beyond these 5 countries if it were to go the way we think it's going to be, with a big focus on 2 big issues. Well, 2 talking points. One is the countries who have formally applied to be part of BRICS, some of them African countries. That's important for us as South Africa. The second is countries who are showing an interest. Good morning.
That's right, Gareth. So when an economist from Goldman Sachs back in 2001 coined the term BRIC without South Africa, which came in much later, he saw enormous growth potential in these developing economies, that being India, Brazil, China, and of course now South Africa as well included there, and Russia, of course. So there is a huge potential that other countries, and not just on the African continent, are beginning to see when it comes to the growth of the global economy, but also a move away from the global south as we adjust the world economies to the energy issues that we have, climate change. It's saying, how do alternative economies apart from the global west work on these issues that developing countries are grappling with? And I've got Professor Mark Swelling this hour, Gareth, who joins me to talk about those issues. He's the chair of the Development Bank of South Africa. A very good morning to you, Professor Swelling. A very important 3 days that we are embarking on here. And of course, one of the central discussions that are going to be happening here is the just energy transition for South Africa in particular, which is amidst a crisis, if you will. What do you anticipate that conversation will look like?
Well, I think all the BRICS countries, as well as the countries that want to join the BRICS club, are all facing the challenge of an energy transition, not just in the context of climate science, which is now being confirmed by real-world events that demonstrate the devastating consequences of warming, but also for energy security in economies that are expanding fast with poor populations coming into the middle class. So energy security and a response to climate change is what's going to be driving that discussion. I'm at the financial summit of the BRICS in Cape Town, which is the BRICS Bank, and there's a panel discussion this morning on the just transition, which is really going to address those issues.
And I suppose one of the talking points there, Prof, would be how do you create a balance between decarbonization and social justice? That is a difficult one to create, especially when we talk about not leaving any community or any one person behind as we transition.
Yes, let's talk to the careful governance and management of the transition. If it's merely a question of coal closure without any attention being paid to social mitigation to deal with the consequences for jobs in coal-dependent communities, then the consequences can be devastating. But the alternative does lie in for example, the strategy Eskom has pursued in Komati, which is to replace a coal-fired power station, which at the end was generating very little power, with a large renewable energy power plant, which could potentially create more jobs than were there previously. And if you look at the job creation potential of a renewable program based on building 5 gigawatts per annum, the job creation is larger than the current coal sector. So it's about careful calibration of the strategic rollout. It's not about switching off coal tomorrow, which some politicians have referred to. we will be burning coal probably in 30 years' time still, and we will still have nuclear, but we will have a much, much bigger renewable component. And how that is done, in particular how we have upstream industrialization rather than importing everything from China, that is going to be really what's going to make the difference. It will be the biggest industrialization program since '94.
And of course, you, as the Development Bank of South Africa, you're there with the new new development bank, the BRICS Bank, as you mentioned earlier on, having this energy transition conversation. The financing models that are going to be developed here to make sure that there is investment and the distribution of resources to make sure that we are seeing this just transition. Is that a component that will happen in the discussions that is going to happen? And if you give us a sense of what those financing models, if any, will look like.
It's absolutely central, and it's going to be central in the main summit up in Johannesburg. Don't forget the UN Secretary General is coming to the summit, and one of the issues that he's going to raise is the need to rethink the global financial architecture. Because that is currently configured in a way which is not aligned with the investment requirements to achieve the SDGs. And we are in a very similar position in the South African context. The Minister of Finance has made it very clear that there are fiscal constraints that are going to result in cutbacks in social spending and policing. At the same time, we need large quantities of investment capital, in particular, to upgrade and extend the transmission grid. So we have to box together and find creative ways for doing that. For example, in his budget speech, he referred to concessioning off sections of the grid, for example, the Northern Cape, where there are excellent wind and solar resources. How do you do that in such a way that you have a build, operate, transfer model, not a privatization model, which does nevertheless draw in private sector funding, similar to what has happened with the toll roads? So those are the kinds of things that are going to start emerging, and that's going to be discussed today at the financial summit here in Cape Town.
Professor Mark Swelling, thank you very much for joining us this morning. He is the chairman of the Development Bank of South Africa, engaging us on the just energy transition and the trading bloc that is BRICS, the role that it plays here in making sure that the resources are available for that to happen without any community being left behind, Gareth. And I'm just going to take a look at our monitor here on the ground. We've got the BRICS Business Forum that is set to get underway. Minister Ibrahim Patel set to head that particular gathering. It's in the main hall, the Exhibition 1 Centre, and just a sense of what's happening there is that there's quite a gathering of people that have already made their way to their seats in anticipation of that business forum. And just very briefly, if I will, Gareth, the business forum of the BRICS Business Council in its entirety is an important component of BRICS. And this is because it steers away from the politics of the nations and the geopolitical developments that happen and focuses on the growth of the economies of these countries at a grassroots level. And then, of course, as you've mentioned, over the next 3 days, engaging in discussions not only about a BRICS currency, but also the entrance of other countries that will contribute to the growth of the trading bloc.
Yeah, and I still think one of the big focuses, at least for me, maybe you'll agree or disagree, Rofhiwa, is not just the potential inclusion of other countries, but it's the African countries when you look at how it's going to benefit us as South Africa within BRICS as well. So good to hear that some of the program getting underway from 9 o'clock this morning. The summit formally opening later this afternoon. Rofhiwa Madzena, our team, going to be out there the entire day and over the next 3 days for us. I've mentioned a couple of times now that there are some African countries who have applied formally. These are the countries applying formally. If we go back to Rofhiwa later, I'm sure we can talk about this. Algeria, Egypt, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Senegal are just some of the African countries. And we have to ask ourselves the question, as the last member into BRICS, as South Africa, if we were to bring more African countries into the economic bloc, how does it benefit us? How does it benefit Africa? Certainly has to be one of the big talking points. Rofhiwa, thank you. We'll come back to you again a little bit later.